Hello, welcome to Desert Mystic Bedroom. And yesterday was my talk on the Armenian Genocide, which is a very sensitive topic, of course. And I will like to give a moment of silence to the victims. I'm playing the music because I want to show that the world does go on, and that doing the work of revealing and talking about these difficult subjects is something that needs to be respected, and also, of course, it's going to impact your life, because it is traumatic. Even researching it is traumatic because you hear about the horrific atrocities that happened in the Armenian Genocide, including the Greek genocide that was happening around the same time. And today I learned about the burning of Smyrna, which is a Greek city that's in Turkey today. So it was a city that was subjected to such a violent burning in 1922. So 7 years after the Armenian Genocide, Greeks were being massacred on a large scale, as well as other ethnic groups in the city. So knowing that there was a Greek genocide, an Armenian genocide, and a genocide in Iran, the Iranian genocide, they're all happening at the same time around World War I. So around 1915 to 1917. And then going into the 20s, we see acts of violence. And knowing that Thule Society was established in 1917 as a very dangerous organization. Unfair how history works out, because the victors do write the book. So those who do have the most authority and manpower, they're going to have the advantage of writing the history of the outcome that happens. So the rise of fascism is the story of the secret society world. And that's why I'm a proud historian of the secret society history. Because you see how history developed just through a different lens, through the undercurrent of this world of the esoteric, the world of the lesser known knowledge. In many ways, it's connected to the rise of synarchy, hierarchical belief that those with enlightenment shall be the leaders. And this is interesting to know how the synarchy party was founded in Mexico, and actually had to be outlawed for radicalism, and just as the radical left party in Mexico was outlawed. So seeing the esoteric does influence the political in very profound ways that are often shunned and not talked about fully. So me doing a deep dive into the Armenian Genocide's connection to the secret society world is a very important step to recognizing the Armenian Genocide did happen, and we need to find out how it happened and who is responsible. So last video was my draft intro, so I want people to bear with me, because I'm going to start off where I left off, which is going into the discussion of the rise of the modern genocide as its involvement to the rise of more advanced technology and communication systems. So this means talking about the telegraph system, talking about the rise of the radio, in the context of the Red Scare happening all around the globe. So seeing the Armenian Genocide as firewood for a bigger Red Scare, and then once the Bolsheviks get power, then they display violence. Because now they have to control their government that they took over through strong man force, and slowly kicking out Menshevik socialist revolutionaries. Monarchy is already gone by that point. So the Bolsheviks wanted all power for themselves, and I'm not here to say the Bolsheviks are good, but I am here to say that they did, obviously, abuse human rights during the Russian Civil War, But looking within the context of Armenian genocide, where the use of the slow word Bolshevik before the Bolsheviks have power is something to be noted, because we see this as a framing of the regime to repackage the genocide as a preemptive strike against an alleged internal uprising by revolutionary agents. So it's very interesting because that's basically their post de facto, so after the fact, justification So maybe go to where I wanted to talk about the importance of the minister, post, and telegraph role. So I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to go for it anyway. Medariza Bey, also known as the minister, post, and telegraph, played a crucial role but often lacked administrative function in facilitating the genocide through control of communications. So turn off the music because I found really where I want to read off from my notes. So the key role of the function of the Minister of Post and Telegraph is to control the flow of information and to channel those communications in an effective way so that government can properly administer its functions. But it was used as an apparatus for censorship and surveillance. So the Ministry of Post and Telegraph was responsible for monitoring and censoring all telegrams and letters and news outlets that came into the empire, especially during the genocide against the Armenian population between 1915 and 1917. Intercepted, the suppressed telegraphs were able to see correspondence coming in from foreign consuls, missionaries, and major Armenian leaders who were reporting about the massacres that were taking place. So therefore, they had the advantage of knowing the information ahead of time, so they could carry out more effectively their massacres. So they used the telegraph system to blockade Armenians from communicating with each other and with the outside world. In addition, they filtered information reaching Istanbul, so the broader Ottoman public was not fully aware of the scale of the atrocities. This allowed the CUP regime to carry out the genocide in semi-secrecy, while presenting a legal or orderly face to both civilian life to international observers. Part 2. Transmitting deportation orders. The telegraph system was the primary way that Talat Pasha, who was the Interior Minister, communicated deportation orders, list of individuals and towns targeted, instructions for local governors, and party operatives. These often contain coded language, such as relocation, meaning death march, dealing with elements of sabotage, meaning mass execution. The Ministry of Post and Telegraph was responsible for ensuring these orders were sent secretly, securely, quickly, and without interruption. The impact is that without this infrastructure, the bureaucratic coordination and mass killings across dozens of provinces would have been impossible. The genocide was a modern operation, and the telegraph system was its nervous system. Part 3. Destroying evidence. After 1916, CUP leaders became increasingly aware that they might face international tribunals after the war. The ministry was involved in destroying telegrams and deportation records, disabling archives, especially provincial telegrams and logs that showed the transmission of illegal orders. Making sure no record of top-level orders could be traced was an important role that Talat and Enver played in the Armenian genocide. 4. Preventing foreign intervention. Foreign consulate and missionaries tried to send urgent telegrams to their governments reporting about the atrocities against Armenians. The ministry often blocked or delayed these messages. It forged alternate versions of telegrams, especially to give false impressions to the U.S. ambassador, Henry Morton Genthal, and German and Austrian observers. So Henry Morgenthau was blocked from having proper awareness of what was happening. This blunted international reaction and played a potential humanitarian blockade by silencing and secrecy. Who was the minister? So Mehmet Meza Bey, a member of the Committee of Union and Progress, though less known than Talat Enver and Kemal Pasha, he was part of the inner administrative circle. According to some post-war records, he was directly complicit in the logistical implementation of deportation orders. So there's documentation in Taner Akkan's work titled Killing Orders that telegraph lines were used to coordinate the extermination and that the ministry actively prevented their content from being leaked. What happened after the war? After the fall of the CUP regime in 1918, the Allies demanded trials for war criminals. Mehmet Reza Bey was named in some post-war indictments, especially in the Istanbul trials in 1919 and 1920. However, like many others, he escaped full prosecution, either through the amnesty granted by the Turkish Republic or lack of surviving documentation due to records destroyed. So the control over the telegraph communication system served to transmit deportation and extermination orders. It served for censorship and surveillance by blocking Armenians and foreign communication. Also, it served as a way to order what records should be destroyed and help to cover up the genocide by erasing evidence. Also, it served as a means to spread misinformation and propaganda and to delay messages, as well as to interfere with foreign diplomats' ability to report on their atrocities. So moving forward, it's important to note that the Ottoman Empire, of course, was one of the early empires to have access to a radio system. So I'm going to go through the early history of the Ottoman Empire's use of a modern radio and telegraph system as it pertains to government military directives used in warfare. So, of course, the Crimean War is very important, as that was a devastating war between the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, with the embarrassing defeat of Russia. So during the Crimean War, the first Ottoman military telegraph line was built, connecting Istanbul to Varna, Bulgaria, and the front lines in Crimea. This was supported by British and French engineers and was essential for coordinating with allies. The Ottoman Telegraph Administration played a pivotal role in directing troops. Thousands of kilometers of telegraph lines was built by the empire in the 1860s from the Balkans to Baghdad and beyond. So who introduced it? The introduction of radio wireless telegraphy was primarily a military intelligence initiative, and it came later during the reign of Sultan Abdulhamid II, especially during the Committee of Union and Progress era, Free Turk Revolution, 1908. So they inherited this system that was already deployed in war and for communication all throughout the empire, which was very large, from the Balkans to Baghdad and beyond. The first radio transmission in the empire was made by German engineers working with the Ottoman military, particularly in the context of the Balkan Wars, 1912-1913. Important to note, Ferdinand was assassinated in this region, starting World War I. So we already mentioned Enver Pasha, one of the perpetrators of the Armenian Genocide, as a Minister of War, played a major role in adopting wireless communication for military premonition. Key dates and milestone. 1908 to 1911, experimental use of wireless telegraphy begins in Istanbul and coastal ports. By 1910, the Ottoman Empire acquires Marconi equipment from Britain and Telefunco systems from Germany. In 1912, the first official military wireless stations installed in Istanbul and beyond. So as the war breaks out, World War I, between 1914 and 1918, wireless radio communication became pivotal for military, naval, and German-Ottoman coordination. So important to note, off the top of my head, I'll tell you the alliances in World War I. The German Habsburg Empire allied with the Ottoman Empire against the Russian Empire, against France, and against, of course, Great Britain. So those were the three major powers on one side versus the other three major powers. So important to note. And then, of course, Russia pulls out of the war because they have a revolution happening at their country during the war, and that's when you first had Kerensky take control over the government with the Provisional Government and Constituent Assembly, and then the Bolsheviks, by force, the same year, they take over the Russian Empire and establish the Soviet Union. So this is major history that people need to be aware of. So the Armenian Genocide was happening during the early onset of World War I. So this is a really important part that I'm going to move into. Given that Kerel van Gelder was the first person to have access to wireless radio telegraphy, his connection to the Armenian Genocide is very important. While he's not widely known in mainstream Ottoman studies, it's important to note that he was a man of extensive influence. Given that the secret society world, the Young Turks, they all were major supporters of Freemasonry, and that was a major place for one's own civil development, entering the secret society world. So what is one of the most important lodges in Salonika? So in Salonika, there was a very important Masonic lodge that, of course, needs to be discussed. So it's the Macedonia Freemason Lodge. I'm not saying that like this is a perpetrator for all this evil that's done, but Macedonia Risota was founded in 1864. And so it was an important Masonic lodge of the Italian obedience that existed between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century around the city of Salonika. From its inception, this lodge was strongly associated with the liberal nationalist movement of the Young Turks, and would later serve as the headquarters for the Committee of Union and Progress. This is fundamental history. So the CUP was launched from this Masonic lodge. The lodge was founded in 1864 in Salonika under the name of Macedonia, being one of the first Masonic lodges in the Ottoman Empire. Like the other Masonic lodges of its time, Macedonia was viewed with suspicion and mistrust by the authorities, which led to it being persecuted. In 1895, the lodge was refounded by Emanuel Carcasso under the name of Macedonia Resorta, Macedonia Resurrected, also being its first president. First Carrasco's presidency, the lodge brought a solid, reliable, and secret haven for the revolutionary activities of the Young Turks. Some important figures came from this lodge, including the infamous Mehmed Talat Bey, who joined in 1903, as well as with many other important Turkish politicians and family members of the CUP. So, an important aside is House of Ottendorf. Not his real name. His real name is Glauer. But Ottendorf, the supposed first Hitler, who was like a Manchurian candidate, founded by Kathy Katrina Beerbaumer, one of the mysterious lists of the clients of Thule registration. So Ottendorf knew about how important this lodge was to social networking. Obviously, Kerel's connection to this lodge is something that needs to be investigated, and that could be something to be updated in a separate video. But knowing that Kerel's position as somebody who gave government administrative officials access to the Telegraph Administration to be able to know how to use it and to be able to cultivate proper communication systems that could be used for development economically, but apparently was used to perpetuate massacres. So he's giving them the means of doing it. Is he aware that it's happening? Something that needs to be asked. And this is something that comes from research. A possible connection to Ottoman elites is worth noting. To what extent do you have access and awareness to those in power having the means of communicating? Would they abuse it? To what extent did Kerel van Gelder know about the genocide? Was he in a position to know? That's something that I want to know, because he is someone who had technical awareness of the infrastructure and the communication system, whether it's used for military diplomacy or economically, or for civilian communication. So we have direct or indirect contact with Armenian officials, especially in the CUP and the secret society world, and via connection to the Ottoman world. Working in our near key cities, especially Istanbul, Beirut, Damascus, Smyrna, Izmir, and other major telegraph relay points. And the answer is very likely yes, or at least he suspected or had indirect knowledge that something was happening, such as mass deportations and killings. Wireless communication was not secure enough in the air. Many operators overheard or handled messages referring to the supposed relocation of Armenians and other coded words such as sabotage control. What would he have seen? What would he have heard? Wireless and telegraphic communication is very technical, and therefore foreign technicians are often required if necessary for problems and for repair. So orders of deportation, rail schedules, resource allocations, reports made by provincial officials, governors, detailing incidences wanting to deal with Armenians. Telegrams monitoring execution lists, property seizures, and confiscations of communication equipment within Armenian villages. In fact, some German and Austrian officers documented seeing these messages and later described what they read. Van Gelder, if in a similar position, likely encountered this too, or knew others would have. Was he connected to the elite? We mentioned that he was connected to secret society elites, but was he connected to government elites in the Ottoman Empire who had access to CUP leadership? Was he connected to German military advisors? Was he connected to technicians who repaired the systems and updated them and expanded them? Was he connected to Ottoman PTT officials? It's highly probable. He would have overheard rumors and conversations. He would have witnessed administrative euphemisms being passed through the communication system. He would have seen the priority telegrams, and he would have been involved in rerouting and ensuring the communications were successfully relayed. This is very important information that I'm revealing and asking the necessary hypothetical questions for somebody of such extensive influence at the time. Precedent for other telegraph operators who would have known about the atrocities, such as German officials like Armenian Genec, who became aware of the genocide and did report it, American missionaries and other operators who intercepted the messages and reported it, and other Ottoman and German railway engineers who witnessed mass deaths during the deportations and left behind memoirs and reports and accounts. If Van Gelder was in a comparable role, technical but embedded in the Ottoman infrastructure, then he would have most certainly have heard about this at the very least, and he would have been exposed to this information indirectly. The conclusion is yes. If Kerel van Gelder was active in wireless telegraphic communication in the Ottoman Empire during 1915 and 1917, he would have had a degree and access to what was happening within the elite network and infrastructure at the time. It was very likely he was aware or strongly suspected that a genocide was occurring. This technical position cannot be underrated. Someone aware of such extensive knowledge happening and the means to allow it to happen is pivotal and must be discussed. Sensitive communication and censorship also occurred within the system. An important question is to ask to what degree the commands were conducted within various languages, especially within English. The answer is yes. Some commands were conducted in English during the Ottoman Empire's genocide against the Armenian population. It's very important to note this because English was an important communication language within people within the Theosophical elite circle. Some Thule Society notes were conducted in English. Possibly, notes that conducted in English are the ones targeted for destruction, and therefore there are less and less amounts of English records left. So what were the main internal languages used? Of course, Ottoman Turkish, but occasionally French for diplomacy, sometimes German and military contexts within the German alliance in World War I, and English used sometimes in internal commands related to the genocide and military operations. So this important information shows the forensic trail of the genocide and the language of communication. If orders are carried out in English, then those personnel must be held to account who carried out such orders. So official Ottoman communication, of course, involved topics discussed such as orders of deportation, relocation, seizure of property, and execution lists. Included Arabic scripts, pre-Republic Turkish. So important English language transmissions were handled by Armenian missionaries reporting on the genocide to U.S. consulates and to neutral diplomats in an attempt to warn and stop the genocide and to sometimes block or censor Ottoman officials. An example, Henry Morgenthau, the U.S. ambassador to Istanbul 1913-1916, sent English language cables to Washington, describing the genocide in real time. These were occasionally intercepted or delayed by the Ottoman Telegraph Office. So I'm going to end my video soon, and I would like to do my next video discussing the connection between the Ottoman Empire and the Dutch East India relationship, which is very interesting, often underlooked, because I think it will provide more information about Kerel van Gelder's connection to the Armenian Genocide. So thank you for taking your time to talk about a difficult subject, and I hope this video is informative.